Welcome to Ask 11, KBYU's program where we invite viewers to learn directly from experts on a topic. Tonight, the topic is state government, and we have Utah's chief executive with us. Governor Gary Herbert came to office in 2009 after Governor Jon Huntsman resigned to serve as the U.S. ambassador to China. In 2010, Governor Herbert was elected to serve out the remainder of the term and won his own full four-year term in 2012. Welcome, Governor Herbert. It's a pleasure having you in the studio tonight.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. It's nice to be here.
Now, this is going to be your opportunity to ask the governor questions that are on your mind. We're taking your phone calls right now at 1-855-801-1980. You can send us an email at this address. It's ask11@byu.edu, or you can send your question via social media. That's using our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/KBYU11, or you can tweet us with @KBYU11. Now, Governor Herbert carries out the laws enacted by the Utah legislature, which began its yearly session last week. John Hanson from 11 News was on Utah's Capitol Hill to gauge some of the issues legislators find they're facing in the early days of the session.
On the heels of the recent ruling on Amendment 3 and the Supreme Court's stay on same-sex marriage, House Bill 231 would prohibit forcing any clergy from solemnizing a marriage that violates their religious beliefs. This is a particular concern for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who recently released a statement prohibiting ecclesiastical leaders from performing same-sex marriages. If you've looked out the window and thought there was a storm coming in just to find out it was inversion, you're not alone. House Bill 61 outlines provisions to improve the air quality in Utah above and beyond what the governor has already implemented. The bill includes replacing older school and city buses with cleaner, more efficient ones, increasing state tax incentives for those who buy and use hybrid and electric vehicles, and the creation of a clean air council that would be independent from businesses and other government organizations. In his address to the state, Governor Herbert put pressure on the legislature to continue to improve education in the state of Utah. He says the legislature must increase accountability in the education system, and the state must provide students with an education that will give them a leg up when they enter the workforce. Herbert also pushed the legislature to provide better pay for teachers across the state.
My budget calls for maintaining base funding and for $111 million in new money for our public schools, including a modest but well-deserved pay increase for our teachers.
And if you thought that filling up the old gas tank was already too expensive, then House Bill 266 is likely to not be very popular in your books. It would allow the State Tax Commission to push up the price at the pump by increasing the tax on fuel by up to 5% every year. The tax would include specialty fuels as well as fuel for cars. If the bill is approved, the tax increase would begin on July 1st of this year and then every subsequent year that follows. The bill says that the money would increase revenue for the Transportation Fund and aid in the maintaining and building of roadways across the state of Utah.
Well, there you have it, Governor. In John Hanson's report, we heard about a smorgasbord of legislative issues, and from Amendment 3 to gas tax possibility, gas tax hikes. As you hear about that and review just the early part of the session, how does that dovetail with your own personal agenda for the state?
Well, the issues that people like are very similar. The concern I've always had is growing the economy. That's been my #1 focus since I came in as governor. But education is right there. It's been my #1 budget priority. Clearly an emerging issue that everybody's talking about is air quality, and we're putting out proposals there as far as how we can improve the air quality, and not only industry that has a responsibility, but the rest of us have a responsibility, and unless we all participate, we won't clean up the air. Right. Education is a big issue, and how we fund a growing population. We have issues like water and planning for our future. We're the second fastest growing state now in America. So there's just a lot of issues out there that we'll be talking about in this legislative session, which are my priorities, but more importantly, they're the people of Utah's priorities.
We're going to talk in a few minutes about the economy, because you did not only hit it in the state of the state, which there's a lot to be proud of, but we have a lot of questions too, and we'll follow up on. First, we do have some emails, as we've been encouraging our viewers to send us. This first email is coming in from Jonathan Bailey of Farron, Utah, and he writes, "I would like to know more about your decision to fight same-sex marriage. If you are really serving the wants of citizens, then why don't the polls and petitions prove that? Why haven't you adopted or adapted your actions to accommodate the people's opinion?"
Well, how you understand the will of the people, we have laws. We have elected representatives who represent the will of the people and create laws. It is a democratic republic. We had an initiative petition was put together in 2004 that created Amendment 3. So we have laws on the books that represent the will of the people. If the people don't like those laws, there's a process to change them. And until they change, I have an obligation. In fact, I've sworn to, in fact, enforce the laws of Utah and uphold the Utah Constitution. So that's how we know the will of the people, and we have no choice, really, than to move ahead and defending the laws that have been created by the people of Utah.
I think there's some confusion because he's also probably alluding to the fact that there are recent polls that are different. In other words, the mindset in 2014 is different than it might have been in 2004.
Well, we don't govern by polling. We don't stick our finger in the wind and see which way the opinion is right now. We govern by law. We believe in the rule of law. It gives us a straight pathway forward as far as what we should be doing. If people don't like the law, and the laws get changed all the time, there's a process through their elected representatives or initiative petition where they can change the law. But we can't just take a poll and say, oh, gee, I guess they've changed, and so we will violate the law. That doesn't work. So we have an obligation to defend the law. The Amendment 3 is a big issue. It has national repercussions. And we need to make sure we defend that to the end of the stream, meaning that we can't just have some unelected judge who's connected the dots differently than ever in our country's history. He's the first federal judge to ever say under the United States Constitution there's a right to same-sex marriage. And so, again, he probably's got a good legal theory. I've read his opinion. He's done it a little differently than others in the past, but we won't know until we go through the democratic process, the judicial process, and get a conclusion, which is what everybody on this issue should want to have happen. Let's go to the end and find out what the courts ultimately say through our democratic judicial process.
Well, and let's stay with that for just a minute, because Utah now has some 1,300 same-sex couples who married during that window between when Utah's ban on gay marriage was overturned and the stay by the U.S. Supreme Court that reinstated the restriction. So if the Utah law is upheld by the courts, which is in question, but if it is upheld by the courts, should the state make any accommodations for those 1,300 couples in terms of traditional spouse rights?
Well, again, we're kind of breaking new ground here. There's a lot of questions out there we don't have answers. The concern I had when we didn't get the stay from Judge Shelby is it was going to create a lot of chaos. Not the euphoria of people running down and getting married, but the chaos with the laws and the hundreds of years of tradition and precedent and the laws on the books. We don't know what the ramifications of that are going to be, and courts probably will have to help us sort that out. That being the case, we had a law on the books. We had a law taken off the books with the Shelby ruling, and we had a law put back on the books with the Supreme Court stay. So it is confusing. I understand that. We have really, with the stay, have gone back to pre-Shelby, meaning that the Amendment 3 now is the law of the land in Utah. We have to adhere to that law. Everything's kind of frozen in place. And until we get through this process, we won't know all the answers to all the questions.
Well, and suddenly Utah is in the throes of national history. It came as a surprise to so many people, this, and of course we'll be following that. Our next question is about Medicaid. Okay. And you said that doing nothing to expand Medicaid coverage to provide some health care for poor Utahns is not in the state's best interest. What do you see as the critical factors in getting Utah's poorest families health insurance?
Well, let me tell you, the problem is there's a flaw in the Affordable Care Act. With that coupled with the Supreme Court decision on the Affordable Care Act, it's left in Utah a group of people that live below the poverty line, about 60,000 people that don't have access to health care and insurance coverage. And the irony is that we have people making above the poverty line that have access and help in their health care. It's not right, it's not fair to have people making less and getting less. So the question is what to do. And that's going to be the challenge. We've talked in terms of a Utah solution to find a way uniquely so. The one-size-fits-all that comes out of Washington, D.C. doesn't necessarily work.
Other states, Arkansas and Kansas, have been looking for their own solution as well.
Yeah, Arkansas has done a different approach than full expansion. When I said, doing nothing is not an option, I said, we can't leave these 60,000 people stranded. We have a moral obligation to help the poor, and I think there's a way to do that. I've mentioned that we have principles that we should follow. One, everybody who can work should work. That's the first principle. Before you get government aid, if you can work, you should be having a job. Two, we ought to empower the private sector rather than expand government programs.
Rather than using public funding, one of the proposals may be using private funding to fill that gap.
Charitable care is certainly a part of it. But as we get taxpayers' dollars, we ought to funnel it into the private sector, not to just expand a government program. We'll get better bang for the buck by empowering the private sector, insurance companies, private sector people, than if we do it into some kind of government program. Thirdly, we need to make sure that we get maximum flexibility with the federal programs we have. Again, what we do in Utah and what they do in Arizona are going to be different. We have a very young population in Utah, 29.2 years of age. We're the youngest in the country. Arizona has a senior citizen population. Their health care needs are different. So with our Medicaid programs, we need more flexibility to uniquely serve our unique populations and demographics. And last but not least, we need to remember this is about taxpayers' dollars and do what is in the best interest of the taxpayer. I have not liked the fact that some of the debate's been defined as there's federal taxes and there's state taxes, as if somehow they're different. They all come out of our pocket. They're all generated by the private sector taxpayers of Utah. And so we need to find out what is in the best interest of the Utah taxpayer in the short term and the long term.
Is there a timeline that you're looking for or looking towards in trying to make this decision about what we're going to do with that Medicaid gap?
I've always said I wanted to work in conjunction with the legislature. They're in session now. We've had a lot of discussion and analysis as far as the different proposals and different options out there. But my hope is that we'll come to an agreement between the executive branch and the legislative branch before the end of this 45-day session. So that's our goal, and we're going to work towards that. Hopefully in the next 3 weeks we'll have something we can kind of come together and build some consensus on.
One thing we love about Ask 11 is also inviting our viewers to send us email and to tweet us and call in, and we've got another email now coming in for you, Governor. This email is coming from Nathan Johns of Salt Lake City, and he writes, when the decision on Medicaid expansion is made, will you ensure that the citizens of Utah get to utilize all of the carriers who want to participate in offering valid plans?
We have a couple of different approaches. We have Avenue H, which is our own exchange, which we started way before the Affordable Care Act.
We led the country. That's for small business.
Well, Massachusetts was first, but they had a mandate. Utah came up with their own solution, which is voluntary. We have a good healthcare system already in Utah. That's part of the frustration, is that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We have the lowest cost healthcare in America in Utah and the 5th best, highest rated quality. So low cost, high quality. It's working. We only have about 13% of our population that have not had access to health care, insurance programs, and half of those could get it if they wanted to. So we're talking about 7 or 8% of our population we're having to deal with. So we have a good program to give them myriad of choices through our Avenue H, where they have defined contributions. They can take the money from their employer and shop around, add to, take from, find an insurance program that's good for them.
That's customized
for themselves or family. The federal government program, we have about 6 carriers in Utah under the federal exchange. There's a total of about 96 programs. They have to qualify to get on the exchange. There are more choices where there's more people along the Wasatch Front than there are in rural Utah. Under the laws, the carriers don't have to provide service to every county. They can pick and choose where they want to go. So it limits some of the choices they're given. We'll see how it works. The concern we all have, is it going to drive costs up? The theory was it was going to drive costs down, but the costs of insurance have gone up. Instead of going down by $2,500, as the president promises, they've gone up by $2,500. And the young people are having to carry the burden of a lot of this.
And that was the expectation, though, that the more young that enrolled, the lower the cost would go for everyone because they tend to be healthier. Sure. But
and the young invincibles are not getting involved as much as probably was planned. Again, the penalty is not much. And that's less expensive than actually paying the premium. So where's the incentive to actually get involved unless you just feel like it's your civic duty? So we're a long ways from making a determination on the success or failure of Obamacare. We're trying to do our best under the law. It is the law of the land, whether you like it or not. it's passed and is the law of the land. We're trying to work with the Department of Health. We're asking for waivers, give us more flexibility on Medicaid. We've been part of the Medicaid system since the late 60s. This is not a new thing, and we've kind of made that decision. Now it's a matter of us determining what's in the best interest of the taxpayers of Utah, how we go forward with what's called Medicaid expansion, and clearly we need to deal with this, we call it kind of a donut hole of people, 60,000, that are going to be not having access to insurance and health care if we don't do something. That's why I say doing nothing is not an option.
And those 60,000 are our neighbors. They're
Right
neighbors
down
living
the
in our
street.
state. We've got a call coming, speaking of right down the street from Pleasant Grove. Rob is on the phone right now. Rob, what is your question for the governor?
Thank you, Governor, for giving us this opportunity. How is the state doing in getting our land out of the hands of the federal government?
The public land issue has been around since I was a county commissioner in the early 90s. And I've worked with a couple of guys down in southern Utah to come up with a program as far as how could we, in fact, get the public lands better managed by having Utah more involved. And the idea of forcing the federal government to do what they agreed at the time of statehood, which was dispose the lands. In 1896, when we became a state, those that had private property were able to retain their private ownership, but all the unpurchased land that was not homesteaded or owned was given to the federal government for a purpose, and the purpose was to dispose of it. To give you a contrast, at the same time we became a state, North Dakota became a state under the same almost exact criteria, same wording in their incorporation as a state. They disposed of all that land. So in North Dakota, they only have about 9% public land. In Utah, we have about 70% public land. So big contrast. Who knows why? I expect a lot of people didn't want it. It was pretty desolate land. You know, Brigham Young, when he said this is the right place.
He had to go over a lot of open land before he got here, right?
And more better farmland, more irrigation. So he came to this desert, and maybe that was not as conducive for people to acquire from the federal government. That being said, we just want to have this land managed correctly, optimally. Under the BLM, where it should be multiple use. That means not just tourism and travel, which is a big part of what we're doing, but natural resource development, farming, ranching, and other areas that we can optimize and utilize our public land. So we're just saying in Utah, let us have a stronger voice in how we deal with these public lands.
And when you say let us have that voice, how do you exert that voice? It sounds like the caller was saying, how do you prevent the federal government from taking over more?
Well, some of it's negotiation, and you know that would be the best way. I've spent a lot of time with former Secretary of Interior Ken Salazar, who's a rancher over in Colorado who really kind of gets it, and Sally Jewell's the new Interior Secretary, who's a business lady who spends a lot of time in Utah, hiking, camping, enjoying the outdoors. So she understands what we have here. We have the ability to litigate. We don't want to take away the iconic vistas and venues we have. We have never had any desire to take over the national parks or the wilderness areas and some of these beautiful places. But we certainly can do better when it comes to management of our forest lands and our range lands, the wildfire problems, how we can develop and access our not only our natural resources, our energy resources, our water development that needs to be taken care of. I mean, water is a big issue for Utah in this arid climate. So there's just a better way to manage the public lands, and Utah has a voice, and we ought to be part of that at the table.
Well, coming up in a few more minutes, we'll also talk about water and natural resources because there'll be lots of questions on that as well. We do have a phone call right now coming in from Linda in Ivins. Linda, welcome to Ask 11. What is your question for the governor?
Oh, thank you. I'm very interested in education because I feel that it's the future of our nation and of our state. And I'm very pleased that this has been a priority for the governor. But there has been a decline in the percentage of funds given to education since 1993. And I know that there needs to be an infusion and a real change. One of the news people that the other day said, is this going to be a big change for education or just business as usual? Governor, how do you see us making a big change in education and making it our priority and making it better for Utah?
Well, thank you. Utah has always been a unique challenge when it comes to funding education. Part of it's because of the public land issue. we have 70% of our land mass that we cannot tax. And we get what's called payments in lieu of taxes, PILT payments, which was not put in the compromise budget. It looks like it just got voted on to be put in a farm bill, but it's like getting 10 cents on the dollar. If we could put a property tax on a good portion of our public land, if it was private, we'd have a lot of money for education. We also have a high birth rate. We have a fast growing population. People are moving to Utah because of economic opportunity and quality of life. And it puts a lot of pressure on our schools. Our schools are growing at about 11,000 students a year. We have to put $65 to $70 million into this public education system just to maintain the status quo.
So rather than playing catch up, Linda's saying is how could you not just play catch up but actually get way ahead?
Well, I can tell there's only 3 ways to put more money into education. One is to find more efficiencies in the system. We're working with the public education people, our higher education. Can we use more technology, computer adaptive testing, making sure we have reading proficiency by 3rd grade and math proficiency by 6th grade, giving those basic building blocks so that they have college and career readiness when they graduate from high school, increasing our graduation rates. All those point towards success. It takes some resources. So efficiency in the system to get better bang for the buck. The other one, people propose to me all the time, well, let's raise the tax. Let's just increase the income tax. One of the reasons we've been successful economically is because we've had a competitive tax rate. If we follow the pathway of Illinois and California, our economy will slow down, just like it has in Illinois and California. Illinois raised their income tax and immediately over the next 6 months lost 100,000 jobs. That could be actually counterproductive, raise the tax but have reduced revenue. So we've chosen Utah to do it by growing the economy, expanding the economic pie. And we've got about $330 million of new money we're putting into the system this year in our budget proposal. About $261 million is going into education, the bulk of the money. Last year we did a similar kind of thing, almost $300 million into education, new money. So we've chosen the pathway of grow the economy, expand the economic opportunity, and actually have more revenue coming into the system with the priority being into education. Last point, I'm smart enough to know that for our long-term sustained economic growth, and we're the 2nd fastest growing economy in America today, still struggling because of the drag on the economy out of Washington, D.C., but we're out of the recession. We're actually having net job gain, and other states, look at Utah, wow, what are they
Different
doing?
parts of the region, Southern Utah's talked about that too.
We've created a very business-friendly environment that is working and creating jobs and economic opportunity, but we can't continue to have that long-term unless we have a strong, educated, skilled labor force. So business-friendly environment includes having a labor force that the entrepreneur, the business people, the end user wants to hire from. Hence, we're doing a lot of work on raising the bar and graduation rates, STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math, giving people the skills they need to align with the demands of the marketplace. And in so doing, we're going to have the education force for the jobs of tomorrow, and we're doing it today. So we're on the right path. One point she mentioned too is that she says that the percentage of our household income that goes into taxes to pay for education has been reduced. That's true, because even though we're putting more money in, we've reduced taxes on households. Our personal income is growing, so we're able to have the best of all worlds, a very business-friendly environment, but putting more money into education without putting a damper on families and individuals where we're taking too much of their hard-earned money in the way of taxes.
Well, we appreciate that, and we're going to take a short break. We'll be back to talk about natural resources and take more of your questions on Ask 11. And welcome back to Ask 11 with our Governor Gary Herbert, who is our special guest today as we talk about government, state government in particular. We're taking your phone calls, also taking your emails. You can tweet your questions, and we've got someone on the line right now. It is Bonnie from Salt Lake. Bonnie, thank you so much for calling Ask 11. What is your question for the governor?
Yes, I'm wondering, these 60,000 people that you're talking about, how many years will it take you to get them some health care if we don't expand Medicaid? And if you don't expand Medicaid, do you and Becky Lockhart realize that this will be your legacy, that you just wouldn't cover these people that waited 60 years for health care?
Well, I can't speak for Speaker Lockhart as far as what she's trying to accomplish. I know I'm trying to find a solution to the problem of 60,000 people that do not have access to insurance and health care because of this gap that's been created by a flaw in the Affordable Care Act. The question is, how do we solve it? I guess we could have a lot of charitable care, which would come in and solve it. That's probably not too likely, but that may be a part of it. We could do a partial expansion, which would take us up to 100% of poverty, and that would solve that 60,000 person gap. People above poverty can actually have access to the health care exchange and actually buy subsidized insurance. So that would really provide health care access for everybody. So at least a partial expansion is something that certainly needs to be strongly considered. And the issue for some is this somehow fiscally irresponsible? That's the issue. We have a federal government that's spending about 40% more than they take in. They're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar they spend, and the debt's at $17.2 trillion. So it's a legitimate issue. Is this the fiscally prudent thing to do from a federal government side? I'm concerned that we're sending $600 million back to Washington, D.C. and not getting the money back. We've paid the bill. We ought to get the benefit. And if we don't, we'll pay the bill and still get no benefit, and the money will go someplace else. So I think
would that be part of your legacy then, to say that you're committed to taking care of those 60,000 Utah?
I'm committed. I've said that doing nothing is not an option. So we will find a solution. And I don't want to presuppose what the legislature is willing to do. I need to work with them in concert. This is a collaborative effort. We probably won't have all 104 legislators agree with me, but my challenge is to build consensus with the House and the Senate so that we can do something that makes sense for the 60,000 we're trying to deal with and makes sense for the taxpayers of Utah. I believe we will find that. It may be some form of Medicaid expansion. It may be taking some of our federal dollars that are our dollars back, that we share a responsibility with the federal government, and providing these safety net issues that we've always believed are important. Ronald Reagan said, hey, government has a role to play in a safety net kind of way. We take our money back on transportation. We take our money back on other health issues, on education. We don't like the strings. That's part of the problem. I've talked with President Obama and Vice President Biden personally. Give us the money with no strings. Block grant the money to us. We're pretty smart people in Utah. Give us more flexibility, and we'll get more done with less money. We'll help you balance your budget, and we'll get more done with our money, because we can maximize and optimize the use of it if we have less strings attached to it. That's going to be my legacy.
I appreciate that answer. We've got another call coming in from Orem. It's Wendy. Wendy, welcome to Ask 11. What is your question tonight?
I wanted to check on the governor's view of the caucus system and the latest challenge to that.
Count my vote, or
Count my vote.
Count my vote. I'm a product of the neighborhood caucus convention system, and I was able to, as just kind of an average guy, go out and compete against people who were wealthy, people who had great name identification, and because I dealt with 4,000 delegates, become a player based on my ideas and my thoughts and my vision for where Utah should be going into the future. So I have appreciated that system. I don't know that I'd be governor today without it. That being said, it only works if people participate. If we don't have people show up at the neighborhood caucus and elect delegates that represent Main Street Utah, whether Republican or Democrat, we end up having extreme voices. That's the concern that most people have, is that, are we really having delegates that represent the people? And again,
so you're opposed to the Count My Vote initiative? You prefer to maintain the caucus system as
the good news for me is I can say this because I've got high approval ratings in the general population. I have even higher approval ratings with the delegates, according to the latest Dan Jones poll. So it doesn't matter to me on re-election efforts, which system's there. I'm here to say to the people of Utah, unless you participate, unless you become an informed participant, neither system will give us the outcome and the results we want. The system we've had has given us pretty good results. We've had the best managed state in America. Our economy is the second fastest growing now. We've been recognized as the best managed. We're the fourth fastest growing state in America. We have the fourth most diverse economy. So whatever system we've got has given us pretty good outcomes. Now, can it be better and improved? That's the debate. And I think people need to participate. Whatever system, there's no perfect system. It really starts with people being involved. And if people are involved, we'll get the good outcome.
All right. We also have another call from an involved caller. We'll call it that. Pat from Vernal, welcome to Ask 11. What is your question for the governor tonight?
Thank you. My question is, what is the possibility of eliminating the property tax and increasing the sales tax to make it more equitable for property owners?
You know, the property tax is the most hated tax of all taxes. Sales tax, income tax, excise taxes, the property tax, because it's property we own. And particularly when it comes to our home, we don't like the fact that the government could say to us, you don't pay your tax, we're kicking you off your property. And so it is definitely disliked and hated. And the good news for us in Utah is that we are at the lower third in America when it comes to our property tax liability. We also have a system in place called truth in taxation. That means that we cannot, as they happen in most other states, if you have an inflation to your value of your home or your real estate, they don't change the tax rate. They just get a windfall of new money. In Utah, if inflation makes your properties go up, if it went from 200,000 to 400,000, we have to cut the tax rate by half so that there's no new money other than growth that can go into any government coffers. So we've taken an approach in Utah to kind of have a stabled, three-stooled approach. Income tax, sales tax, property tax. Property tax is stable, and sales tax can go up and down. I like the idea of a consumption tax, and I think that's an area that we need to do more of and look at, because everybody consumes, rich, poor, indifferent, and you have to pay your way and you consume. The rich people will buy bigger products, pay more tax. The poor people will pay less tax because they buy less, consume less. So I'm all for having a three-legged stool that has some balance. Property tax is always going to be probably a part of it, although we've kept it at the lower one-third in the nation, so our property tax liabilities are much smaller than most states.
I did receive a question on my personal Facebook page when I talked about how I'd be hosting Ask 11. A gentleman named Michael Carver said, I've always wanted to ask the governor or someone else why we're paying a tax on food. I'm concerned that those in the lowest economic sector, those who are poorest among us, that hurts us the most. What are your thoughts on paying sales tax at the grocery store?
Some states have taken the sales tax off food. It's kind of a moral issue. You shouldn't have to be taxed on food to sustain life. In the states where they've done that, by the way, the taxes go up on other things. You know, the dry goods are the things we need to sustain life. And so pay me now or pay me later or pay me here or pay me there, it's really a balanced approach. A lot of people think that everybody ought to contribute something. And if you take the sales tax off food, nobody pays it, including the very wealthy who can afford to pay it. A better approach is to target it and reduce. We've reduced, by the way, the sales tax off food so that we've taken the state portion off, so that's not there, it's only local. But the argument against that is that if people really need a helping hand, let's help them with food stamps, let's help them with government assistance, aid to needy families, so that those that really need the help get the help, and those that can afford to pay the tax pay the tax.
Into the system. We've got another caller right now. We appreciate that. This is Fred from Kaysville. Fred, welcome to Ask 11. What would you like to ask the governor tonight?
I'd like to ask him about where the line is drawn between the federal government and the state government.
Well, the line's drawn with our Constitution, as we all know that the powers that have been enumerated in the Constitution are what the federal government has. And James Madison talked about the federal government, who was the father of our Constitution, said the federal governments are specific and definite and few. When he talked about the state governments, though, and our rights, they say they're indefinite and many. So we should have more responsibilities in providing whatever services we the people think should happen, as opposed to this overreach we see with the federal government. The Constitution, the idea of federalism, should be what guides us. We've gotten away from that. Our Congress, our elected officials in the House and the Senate back in Washington, D.C., our executive branch there, has taken on more and more responsibility that should be the state's responsibility, and the state should devolve to the local communities, the cities and counties. So that's where you draw the line. It's really in the Constitution and federalism. We are, as governors, I'm going to be the incoming vice chair of the National Governors Association, and then the chair in 2015 and 2016. And together as governors, Republican and Democrat, are saying, hey, this overreach has got to stop. You're getting into our backyards and you're not as efficient in delivering services as we are that are closer to the people. So there's some rebellion going on. I hope to lead that rebellion because it really is hurting the taxpayer. Again, the debt that we've talked about earlier, $70.2 trillion and growing. You know, it's not sustainable. It's going to come back and bite us in the behind sometime all too soon.
We've got another caller on. It's Michael from Centerville. Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight. What is your question for the governor?
Hi, Governor. My question is, I would like to know your opinion on the backdoor tax that's often referred to in Utah. Typically with the fees that's required through government facilities in different various organizations, and what is your opinion on it?
Well, as I understand your question, the concern is kind of stealth taxing where people don't call it a tax, they call it a fee, and somehow that slips through the process, and so fees go up. Fees are an important part of the process of generating revenue, but fees generally should be used for specific purposes. They should be user fees. Hunting licenses, fishing licenses, for example. Department of Commerce business licenses where people have to go through a process that costs money to get their licenses put in place, and the background checks and those kind of things. Those fees should be used to take care of that and that only, not as a hidden way to raise revenues to build roads, pay for law enforcement. Those are what you're talking about, these hidden backdoor fees. We're pretty good in Utah about making sure that doesn't happen. Other states use it clearly as it's easier politically to raise a fee than to raise a tax. But it is, you know, a little underhanded, and again, I think we're doing a pretty good job in Utah of making sure that these fees maintain and are used for a specific purpose as a user fee and not to prop up other revenue sources.
Well, your constituents come in all sizes and all ages, and we've got an email from an 11-year-old, Clarissa in Orem. Clarissa, thank you so much for emailing us. Her question is quite simple, and it goes back to something you mentioned when we were talking about education. She says, I'm really interested in science. How can I get involved in the STEM program?
Well, STEM, we've created a new STEM center. We think it's so important that we find people with aptitude and desire that we start, you know, giving them opportunities to take extra math classes, take more science, learn more about technology. We're going to have proposals in this legislative session about getting people before they graduate from high school to take more computer classes, more computer science, more technology classes as part of their graduation requirements to help them become more career and college ready, particularly for those areas where we're running deficiencies.
In other words, the businesses that have actually come to Utah along the Wasatch Front, and what they're saying is there are not enough highly skilled employees to be able to fill some of these jobs.
Exactly. It's disturbing to me that America and Utah have to import engineers from other countries. Why are we not creating enough engineers in our own state for the demands of the job market out there? Because they're good paying jobs. One of our local institutions has a 2-year associate degree that starts at $75,000 in the computer hardware business. Some of our applied technology colleges, again, have got good jobs that start at $50,000, $60,000 plus benefits. But we're not aligned. People are going into other things. I was with Microsoft not too long ago, and they said, Gary, look at this graph. And they had a graph that showed the demand for jobs in engineering. And we're only producing about 20% of the demand. So we're way out of alignment. We're trying to get people, that's why math proficiency by 3rd grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, getting people with our STEM center. We're putting $14.5 million now into working with alignment and getting people that have got aptitude into the STEM program. So you can start young now. We have a process.
So Clarissa's parents need to find that STEM center.
That's right.
To get her started and get her started early. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes with more questions from you on Ask 11 featuring the governor. Thank you for joining us. And welcome back to Ask 11. I'm Rebecca Cressman, and our special guest tonight is Governor Gary Herbert. We're taking your calls, and we've got a caller on right now. It's Doug from Hennifer. Doug, welcome. And what is your question for the governor tonight?
I had a stroke, so let's move the
on the ground we already own, like the Emerald Island?
As I understand the question, it's about the prison and the prison relocation. There's been a lot of discussion and talk about relocating the prison.
And you have a few options that you're considering, correct?
Yeah, there are a number of options. We actually have $36 million into this budget proposal to expand the pod in Gunnison. So clearly, with a fast-growing state, even though we have a much lower than the national average crime rate, we have people that need bed space that we incarcerate. And of course, there's penalties involved in breaking the law, but there's also an attempt by us to rehabilitate, to make them become productive citizens again and get them out into the society.
So the major drawback to where it's at right now is there's not enough space, or is it a location challenge?
It's old.
Okay.
And so if we stay in space, it's still going to cost us, millions and millions of dollars to refurbish, remodel, tear down, and rebuild. And so the question is there a better location to do that? But it's got to be done in the context of programming. Can we come up with a better facility which will accommodate programming better? The old style prisons don't work good for some of the programs that we have in place to help rehabilitate people. As a county commissioner here in Utah County, we built a new jail rather than remodel the old jail, because we didn't want to get away from the old box cells. We wanted to have better oversight with our law enforcement officers and better accommodations to help with classrooms and rehabilitation and learning. And so we have a jail in Utah County now in Spanish Fort. So it's not just a matter of the land and location, it's also looking at the overall programming for our prisons. That being said, if we can find a better location, we do have the opportunity to expand and open up our technology center there between Utah County and Salt Lake County, which could create billions and billions of dollars worth of economic opportunity going into the future. Not without challenges, but still having economic opportunity. There's certain places for prisons, and in the middle of prosperity and downtown is usually not one of them. So now's a chance to reevaluate, say, hey, if we're going to spend a lot of money, we can spend it in site, or would we be better off spending it with a new modern prison someplace else?
And you're thinking Gunnison would be your first choice?
Well, Gunnison is a part of it. It's not, we need to accommodate the inmates. And we already have a prison in Gunnison, and we have a need for a new pod to accommodate these inmates. The question is, do we build in place, remodel, tear down, rebuild, or do we relocate? And that's part of the discussion. It's not going to be an easy discussion. It's not a black and white a question or answer, but it's something we need to look in a very comprehensive way. And that discussion will continue, but it's got to be in the context of overall programming and rehabilitation and programming of prisoners.
You talked about rehabilitation. We also talked about STEM and education. I wanted to ask you a bit about education and tuition costs, because for the last 10 years, over the last decade, tuition rates at Utah's colleges and universities have risen, and some of the state money for higher education has been cut at that time. And as an example, we were just referring to the stats that at the University of Utah, in the last 10 years, their in-state tuition had doubled in that time frame. So under what circumstances would you consider using state funding to ameliorate or give some tuition relief to students?
Well, listen, I understand the problem. I'm suffering from maltuition myself because of my kids in college and university, and they always complain, hey, the tuition is too high, Dad, why don't you do something about it? The good news is we're about the lower third when it comes to tuition in the country, too. So our cost for tuition in Utah for the great quality of education that are available in our universities is much better than other states. That being said, we still need to find efficiencies in the system. Our universities have been really good. They're educating better today with about $600 less per student. So they found better ways to educate with better processes, technology, et cetera, to get the education that our people need to compete in the marketplace. And we need to continue to look at that. There's going to be a cost from the private sector. The tuitions are going to be a part of it. State has a role to play, and all working together, we need to optimize keeping our costs low and our quality high.
Because it is in the state's best interest to have this population be educated.
Absolutely. It's part of our goal of 66 by 2020. We've put that in place to give us a kind of a focus point where we all pull together. It really is everybody working together for the common good of increasing the educational achievement in the state. And if we don't do that, by the year 2020, our economic performance slows down. We can't be as good as we can be if we don't have those educational achievements, meaning that 2/3 of our adult population by 2020 have some kind of post-high school certificate, associate degree, or full degree. And they also need to line up with the demands of the marketplace. Having a PhD in something that nobody wants just means you're going to be, the fry cook down at Wendy's.
An intelligent one,
An intelligent one, a very learned one, but a fry cook nonetheless.
We had another Facebook question coming in from Susana Escalante. Governor Herbert, can we pay our teachers a little more? I'm asking, although I have no ties, I like this disclaimer, I have no ties to the educational system. Teachers are not receiving the compensation that they deserve. Susana, thank you for that.
Well, we can't thank our teachers enough. They're doing a great job. Our outcomes for the amount of money we spend are phenomenal. We just had a recent test that was done on an international basis, worldwide, and our 8th grade students, when it comes to math, we're the 8th best in the world in Utah. And when it comes to science, we're the 5th best in the world. Our ACT test scores, for those states that are having to take ACT test scores, mandatory, we're number 1 in America. We have a higher percentage in the top 10 of AP placement scores and people taking advanced placement classes. So we're getting some pretty good outcomes. We got to thank the teachers. They're doing a great job.
So you're going to give more money?
We are. In fact, in the budget, I've put in a 2.5% increase in the WPU, which is where the teachers' compensation comes from. It's directed by the local districts, how they apportion that. But it's the largest increase since the year 2008. We put some money in last year for teacher salary and compensation. So little by little, we're trying to raise the salary. There's proposals out there that will be proposed in the legislature of more year-round schools where teachers can get even more money and have their salary go up to $50,000 for a starting teacher. They're going to have to work, 10 months, 11 months out of the year, but just like any other profession. I get it. We want to have a salary that's competitive in the marketplace that attracts people that want to be teachers. They enjoy it. It's not they're going to get rich, but they want to have a livable wage. They can support their family. So a salary that brings people into the teaching profession and keeps them there. And that's the goal we have. And we're doing a pretty good job of moving back. Keep in mind, we just came through the worst economic time in our country's history since the Great Depression. And yet Utah is on the cutting edge, on the forefront of growing the economy, and now we're paying more money to our teachers for the good work they're doing.
All right, we've got another caller coming in from Quentin of River Heights. Quentin, welcome to Ask 11. How can we help you tonight? Quentin, are you still with us? We might have been disconnected. You can give us a call back. In fact, our phone number for you to call is on the screen, so make sure that you're welcome to do that. Mike Bergen from Salt Lake City has tweeted, social media, who allowed UDOT Region 1 to build such an undersized and unsafe bridge over Park Lane in Farmington? Are you familiar with that?
Well, I don't know who, if we're going to place blame or credit. Sometimes what people like and somebody else doesn't like. They might have wanted a smaller bridge and not have increased congestion and attract traffic there. So I don't know. The process is, though, we have regional management plans put together by our local governments. The Wasatch Front, it meets with their cities and their county council people, and they put together proposals of how we're going to spend money for our road needs. That's then put onto the state implementation plan, the state plan, and we have a 5-year and a 10-year plan of how we take finite monies and build transportation systems. And it goes through a lot of vetting, a public process, and get input. It's all done by engineers and smart people that say this is the best way to get traffic to go from point A to point B. And so our UDOT department, through public hearings and the local government people, is how that came to be. And so the process works pretty good. Maybe they don't like this particular one, but it's a process that encompasses everybody, has a chance to come in and make comment.
Do you see mass transit, speaking of which, as a solution for the dirty air that we've been dealing with, the poor air quality in Utah?
Absolutely. 60% of the pollutants that comes out during inversions, where we see the gunk in the air that we all complain about, comes from tailpipes. We could shut down some of the industry out there, which only accounts for 11%. and it still will have gunky air. So we're putting controls measures in place for industry. We're going to be spending tens of millions of dollars on best available technology to reduce their emissions.
What about the individual drivers? Would the state be comfortable saying, you need to drive less? We're going to ask you not to drive because of that 60% contribution into the poor air quality.
You know, we already are making that as part of our program where we have you care about the air. And we're asking people to plan. You know, you don't have to go down to the grocery store twice a day. You know, maybe go down twice a week. Trip chain, where if I'm going to go out to the grocery store and the cleaners and then drop off my CPA and visit my attorney or my daughter or granddaughter, you know, trip chain, do it all at once so that you don't go back and forth and spend more time on the road. Mass transit, carpooling, van pooling. We've got Trax and Front Runner all working very well. It's going to get more and more, I think, hospitable as we work in closing some of the gaps and making it more convenient. But we've got to think in terms of tailpipes, and that's why I've proposed here that we, in fact, move to Tier 3 as soon as possible, which brings in cleaner gasolines and lower emission vehicles, which is the next step for us to go here in Utah. We have the technology. Let's not wait. Let's get after it right now.
Well, we have just another minute or two left in the show. We do have Quentin who called back from River Heights. So, Quentin, we're glad you did. Tell us what your question is for the governor tonight.
Yes, Governor Herbert. A few minutes ago, you mentioned that there was a few states that raised their taxes, and it resulted in slowing of their economy and laying off of jobs. How do you feel that the gas tax in Utah increasing 5% per year is going to affect that when most products go through the transportation system 3, 4, 5, and 6 times before they get to the consumer?
Yeah, it is a concern. What do we do with our taxes? How do we extract money from the populace? That's why we've been very reluctant to raise taxes, particularly in a time when the economy is a little bit fragile. Income tax, though, is a reflection of your income and takes away your purchasing power. Gasoline tax has some effect, but probably not quite as much. We've lost about 10 to 15 cents just to inflation. Our automobiles are, in fact, getting more miles per gallon, so we're not getting proportionally the revenue to maintain and build new roads. A gasoline tax is designed to be a user tax. It ought to be a part of the formula, and it ought to be true. We've just lost over time. So my belief, and most experts believe, that an adjustment to recapture inflation and what we've lost to more efficient cars will have minimal effect on the economy. Not that it won't have some, it's something we need to be careful about. We've got to figure a way going forward to take care of our long-term funding needs for transportation. Because if we don't deal with that, we will have a slump in the economy. You look at Austin, Texas, that lost Dell computers because of congestion on the road. The loss of that was significant to their economy. So finding the right balance point is part of this, but we've got to take care of transportation.
Well, we've appreciated you spending this time with us and answering our questions. Our time is up, and it has been a very interesting hour with you, Governor Herbert. If we didn't get to your question, you're always welcome to contact the governor's office directly. The phone number is on the screen. You can jot that down now. You can also click the big red contact link at the governor's webpage, which is udot.gov/governor. He also does Facebook and Twitter, too. And if you missed some of the program, we'll have it for you soon on the KBYU 11 YouTube channel. Visit KBYU11.org for a link. I'm Rebecca Cressman. Good night, and thank you for joining us.